Coug sounds with a lot of eyes on Las Vegas and the men's basketball program this week. Houston's got a big time football game this weekend in Waco, and Houston heads to Baylor for what ought to be a rivalry game.
You are Locked On Coogs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, Locked On Coogs, the daily podcast all about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, and whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater came step by, thank you for making Locked On Coogs your first listen today and making the Locked On Podcast Network the number one sports podcast network in the world. I want to talk some today about Houston and Baylor this weekend, but if you want to chime in down below and you don't know what to say, tell us if you've been to Waco, what you do there, because outside of the Czech bakery about 30 minutes north, and that whole Magnolia thing's just not really my vibe. Chip and Joanne, tell me what you do there. Today's just brought to you by Game Time. Best place to get in on the action, and we'll talk more about that in just 1 second. But get you into the seats, $20 off first purchase, Locked On College, the code. I want to talk some about in the first segment here, this bonus episode here. Should this be a rivalry game? And the second and last segment about the game itself as I'm figuring out more about this Houston and Baylor matchup. But this absolutely should be a rivalry game. Look, I think there's some things as simple as Houston wears red, they wear green. Let's play the weekend after Thanksgiving as a kickoff to Christmas season every year. I think like things like that are simple and neat and whatever, crisp, however you want to do it. I also think if you go back to the start of both football programs, Yeoman's first win as a head coach in the Southwest Conference specifically was against Baylor, and at a time when Baylor was actually a fairly strong program. The cities and towns are dramatic. I mean, Waco and Houston kind of represent these two opposite ends of both very much Texas. Texas has a lot of different ways to look at it, but the Bayou and Central Texas Hill Country, I guess they're just north of the hills a little bit, but that all works together too. I think there's a lot of different comparisons there. I think the most apt is probably the whole Ann Richards aspect of the whole thing. If you don't know that story, people will put different levels of truth to it. So I'm going to say the alleged story because some of this is, hearsay, folk tales, legend, etc. But Ann Richards, politician, Southwest Conference falling apart. Texas A&M are going. Texas and Texas A&M separate, both going to the Big 12, and they're saying we need a couple more schools. Who we're going to bring with us? They're bringing Tech, and who's the other school going to be? Ann Richards and Lieutenant Governor Bob Bullock. I guess Richards, I should point out, was the governor. Bob Bullock was Lieutenant Governor, and Bullock was a Tech undergrad, Baylor postgrad. Ann Richards was a Texas and Baylor pair of degrees herself. They reportedly had some sway in getting Baylor into the Big 12 over Houston. Reports were that Bullock and Richards both had folks at Texas and Texas A&M under the idea that if they didn't bring both Tech and Baylor, the state would start cutting some of their funding. You remember all the oil money that goes specifically to Texas and Texas A&M that doesn't go to anyone else, right? That would start to get cut and divvied up, and there'd be bills passed, those kind of things. So they end up bringing schools that are not Houston, SMU, TCU, or Rice. I think that all of that tied in with like the famous Dick Schaap story on recruiting violations and money to Kais and the Klingler of it all of that did not help. All of that put together is an Ann Richards story by getting Baylor into the Big 12, 30 years before Houston does. And I think there are parts of that, reported. Some of it's alleged, some of it's legend, and all of those lines are kind of fuzzy. Regardless, Baylor's in the 90s, and Houston waits until the early 2020s, and that 30-year gap or so is a big deal financially still for both institutions. And frankly, Baylor makes a lot more money as the bottom Power 5 team for kind of a laughing stock of a program across sports for a long time, relative to Houston, who find ways to excel in Conference USA and then the American and whatever. after having to initially bounce back, right? Baylor still made a lot more money because of that whole Big 12 thing. So much so they end up poaching Houston's own coach. The Art Briles aspect of this. Now, Briles obviously has his downfall at Baylor, and that whole story happens at Baylor. But he had started his career and his success at Houston before building up Baylor to a national program. So much so that he even had Robert Griffin III, his Heisman Trophy winner at Baylor, committed to Houston before he took the Baylor job. And it stands to reason that with the success that Case Keenum had just had at Houston, that Robert Griffin would have probably also had similar successes. For what it's worth, I really fear there's some clashing of Robert Griffin and Andre Ware, both quarterbacks that have been told that they couldn't play quarterback at Texas, um, and them ultimately getting to be quarterbacks at respective institutions and win the Heisman's. To kind of rebuke that, I think there's some fun comparison there too. There's also something about the idea of the black quarterback and the growth of the black quarterback, right? And how the Andre Ware era, the late 80s, early 90s, kind of started the walk so that folks like Robert Griffin could run later, right? That whole thing. That's probably a more positive way to look at it than the Briles of it all, but that's certainly one way to look at it. I also think that in a more recent sense, the biggest mark of the Baylor athletic program on the men's side of things in the last decade has been the 2021 Final Four. I guess they did win the Big 12 in football in 2021 or somewhere in there as well. That ultimately led to them keeping Dave Aranda, which I think they might give up at this point. Uh, Listen, that 2021 men's basketball team at Baylor is one of the best teams of all time. I'm not trying to take that away from them. I do think, though, that Houston, as a historic program, has more Final Fours than anyone else in the state of Texas, and that puts them on it also high plane in basketball history. And then Houston gets the Final Four in 2021 as well, and is one of the teams that Baylor beats on their run to the national title game in what was frankly a bunch of blowouts for Baylor along the way. Houston was blown out less than other teams were in that path for what it's worth, but then the history of Houston between Hayes, Phi Slamma, Sampson era, all those put together, obviously bigger than any Baylor basketball lengthy history or anything like that. It's kind of a one-off, right? And so you got that. I look at recent football stuff too, because we're talking about a football game and a football rivalry week and all that. Houston doesn't play Baylor between 95 and 2023 when Houston's in the Big 12. There are different, again, reports, allegations, allegedly, we're not doing that, whatever, right? Because of all the comparisons, sure. But in 2023, Donovan Smith leads a flailing Houston team with a Dana Holgorsen head coach that would soon be fired into Waco and wins in overtime and waves the crowd on his way out, right? Then 2024, Houston breaks out the blue jerseys. They're going to do this thing. And really, they got to beat Baylor at home and then BYU on the road to get to bowl eligibility. And they have a great defensive performance. Jeremiah Wilson takes takes 2 picks. One goes to the house. One other one probably also should have. He gets tackled by his own guy. And the offense lays a gigantic egg. Michael Trigg comes on the national scene, and that's all she wrote, right? And that back and forth means Houston and Baylor are 1-on-1 as Big 12 teammates, or Big 12 colleagues, I should say. In a longer picture, even with that gigantic window in the middle that they don't play, Houston and Baylor are 15, 14, and 1 all time. So a win for Houston Saturday would actually even up it exactly perfectly even in the history of the programs. I think this thing makes a lot of sense. I think rivalries are good for sports. They're what makes college athletics different. They make it special. And these are the private versus public, religious versus state. All those different aspects of the thing, I think, factor in too. I just I feel like if you ask someone at Utah throughout the year, it's a great day, except that we didn't beat BYU this year. That's a big deal. If you ask someone at Duke, North Carolina, same thing. Michigan, Ohio State, same thing. That adds a layer to sports over the course of the year that I think Houston fans would benefit from. I think Baylor fans would benefit from. I think so much of our energy collectively in the state of Texas was basically focus on not liking 2 other universities that it kind of meant we didn't build up the rivalries between the Houstons and the Baylors, or if you want it to be Tech because they've had competitive basketball games with Houston as of late, or whatever. I'd point out that those, well, Houston's winning them. Those conference games against Baylor have been kind of, gone to overtime in weird situations too. LJ Cryer, talk about transferring back and forth. Like there's just something to this one that I think should blossom, and I'm going to ride that into the ground if it takes me, because I think there's something. The Baptist versus the Bayou, there's something there that I want to grow, and maybe that's just me. Now, I will say that's all a big macro picture. And a micro picture, Houston's got a game this week that if they win, they're heading towards 10 wins. They got 9 regular season with a bowl game left to go if they can win this Saturday. And I think they should. I'll tell you why in just one second. But first, today's show is brought to you by everybody over at Game Time, because college football is in rivalry week wrapping up. I think you get into Houston and Baylor pretty cheaply this weekend. But as Houston's a big city, if it's a concert, a theater performance, a comedian, a Rockets game, an Astros game, whatever you want to get into, Game Time's going to get you in, because truthfully, as much fun as those Saints can be, as hard as the competition is for those teams, getting into the event is often more challenging than anything itself. That's why I use Game Time. Gives you the advantage as a fan. It's the easiest way to get last minute tickets, the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. When you toggle on over, you can see exactly what you're going to pay right here. And I have to say, getting into the lower bowl for $19 in the end zone for Houston and Baylor this weekend. It's just a couple hours down the road. It's the closest road game outside of the city of Houston you'll play, especially in conference, ever. Uh, they're out on Day Veranda in Waco. You can get in on the action and paint McLean Stadium red with Game Time, getting in the door for $11. Plus, use code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. You can get all the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download Game Time app, create an account, use code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code Locked On College, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. Park Rangers Locked On Coogs here. And this is not just a history lesson episode. We're talking about the potential big picture rivalries here. I do think Houston's got a couple things working in their favor, Dave Aranda of it aside, that add up to a game they have a really good chance to win this weekend. I said the same about TCU. I think they should have won that game too. Also think they should have beat West Virginia. If wishes were fishes, no men would starve. But as I have texted Cam back and forth, and obviously he's covering Baylor at Locked On Baylor, and they've got a lot going on there between the whole AD thing, the Mac Rhodes thing, the they won't fire Randa because of the Mac Rhodes thing, and I think no one wants Randa to stay. All that is working, and so finding a time to work with him has been challenging. But I would point out here that I think even he would admit that Baylor, having lost 4 of the last 5 games, feels like they're spiraling. And a team that came into the season hoping to win the Big 12 early on in the season found out that they were not going to. They just weren't good enough. And it feels like the wheels have kind of come off in a lot of ways. Now, they've got 2 guys that are really, really impressive in Sawyer Robertson as quarterback and Michael Trigg, the wide receiver slash tight end, tremendous pass catching tight end they've got. I think both guys are pros. I think Trigg's probably the better pro. It's also an easier position to play. Robertson's, benefits obviously from all of that as the quarterback. I do think though that when you look at, like, they scored 21 early in the first half, frankly, against Arizona, and just got blanked. The rest of it, they're having trouble keeping Sawyer Robertson upright. Pass rush getting to him. Pass catchers outside of Trigg are proven to be problematic. Baylor, I thought a year ago, was a pretty strong team of running the football. They had a couple moments that against like the SMUs and stuff like that of the world this year, but ultimately that's not been their MO this year either. It's been kind of, can Trigg get open by even a hair? We're going to throw it to him, right? And I think that Houston should be able to work against that. I think Houston's defense, both between the pass rush up front, and the frankly the coverage unit behind it, I think they'll handle that okay. Now Trigg will probably catch one or two touchdowns this week. I don't mean like as a slight to Houston's defense. I just don't think it's a shutout, and I frankly think the kid's really good, right? And Robertson is locked in on him. That works, right? I think that's all fine and dandy. I think the other thing that works against that offense, though, is I kind of feel like they're not going to be on the field a whole lot. Even against TCU in a loss, Houston won time of possession by 5 minutes. Houston runs the football well, and Baylor struggles with mobile quarterbacks. Conner Weigman has kind of regressed some in the last couple of weeks as an overall product, but he is running the ball relatively well. And in their last two outings, Baylor's had a lot of problems with mobile quarterbacks. A couple weeks ago against Utah, Bird Ficklin, who's been starting as of late for Utah, had over 160 yards rushing on just 6 carries. Now, he's a little bit more of an elusive type of runner than Weigman, but they didn't run some like crazy scheme where it just like lucked into this and things popped off. Like there were holes to be run through, and he's just really fast and ran through them. While Weigman doesn't have 4.2 speed or anything like that, I do think Conner Weigman will be able to take advantage of those things in the run game. I also think that Noah Fafita last week at Arizona, while he didn't get out of the pocket and run downfield a whole lot, was able to stay alive in the pocket and let things develop and guys open up for an average distance of target to be just 14.7 yards. So not like deep shots, right? Half his targets are under 14.7 yards. He had almost 3.25 seconds to throw the football. Time to throw was 3.23 per Pro Football Focus. That's a lot of time. And it's not because he had clean pockets, it's because he was able to just kind of move around in the pocket and avoid a lackluster pass rush. Now, they didn't make him get out of the pocket some, so I guess that could be problematic, but Connor can run. I think this is a Baylor program that on the whole is giving up over almost 200, I would say over 180. It's almost 200 yards, over 195 yards of rushing offense per week at 5 yards a carry. And Houston's MO is going to be to run the football, and they're going to do it effectively. And it's not going to be this thing where maybe it is. I don't think the first run of the game is some 50-yard D Connors run. I don't mean it like that. But the death of 1,000 cuts of Houston's offense will be those third quarter and fourth quarter runs for a program where it feels like people are quitting is going to hurt. It's going to hurt them a lot. And I think a lot of people inside and around the program are surprised Aranda's keeping his job. They had to think about this. Aranda is under contract. They had to publicly announce they weren't firing him. That's where the situation was there. If you're also pounding a bad run defense in the face with that as the culture it's surrounding, you're going to be all right. And I think that if Houston can hold on to the football, play clean football, all those cliches we see every week, they'll really be okay in this one and come out with a victory on the road. They're also undefeated on the road this year. I forget, was it Latrell McCutcheon? Someone in a post game recently said that they preached to win in white because white's the road color in college football. They said win in white, stay undefeated on the road, right? And like I just feel like things are going Houston's way in this one. Now I'm going to break it down much more in depth before Saturday. Work on getting that done for you. With Turkey Day here in the middle, we'll see exactly when that hits your news feeds. You're going to hit subscribe and hit the bell so you know when things go live, because Locked On Coogs is primarily Locked On Podcast Network, the number one sports podcast network in the world. That means your team every day. Go Coogs.